In this video, I'm going to talk about bracketing in photography. Alright, so before I jump into this video, let me give myself a round of applause for this beautiful light setup I have done here. It took me nearly 3 days to make it look like this, and it's kind of cool, isn't it? So now, moving into the topic for today, which is bracketing in photography, I would cover this topic by answering 3 simple questions in terms of what bracketing is, why is bracketing needed when taking photos, and finally, how bracketing is done in photography. So what is bracketing in photography? Well, bracketing in photography is a method or a process of taking multiple shots of an image with variable settings, particularly with respect to the exposure of an image. In simple terms, the shutter speed. Usually the aperture, the ISO, and the focal length remains the same. Now, if you're finding this video useful, please hit the like button and subscribe to my channel because it's free and it doesn't cost anything. But it really helps me to bring you more of this kind of a content in future and helps me do what I'm doing. Also, please watch this video till the end because in the end, I'm going to share with you one of the tricks that I do to get the right kind of exposure in my images. So let's move on to the next question, which is why bracketing is needed. Well, often at times when photographing landscapes in extreme light conditions and contrast situations, it becomes extremely challenging to photograph the image that we have in mind due to the extreme shadows and highlights. And so it becomes challenging to capture that one perfect image with just a single shot. This is where bracketing comes into play. It helps us to take 3 or 5 multiple shots, which is later blended into post-processing software and exported as an image which is correctly exposed and well balanced, and probably the image that we have in mind. So now that we know what is bracketing, why is bracketing needed, let's move on to the final question, which is how do we do bracketing? Now, since we know the conditions when taking bracketing shots, it is quite obvious how we do it. Most cameras will have a dedicated bracketing button or an in-camera bracketing option that is available in your camera. However, if you do not have that dedicated button in your camera, you need not worry because you can do all of those things manually. In order to do it manually, you need to have full control of your camera. So you need to put your camera on manual mode and make sure you have 3 of the parameters constant: the aperture, the ISO, and the focal length. Now, depending upon the situation that you have currently, you need to figure out whether you need to take a 1-stop underexposed image, an overexposed image, or a 2 stops underexposed and an overexposed image. And then you have to take 3 shots or 5 shots depending upon the situation, one which is at the metered spot, meaning at the correct exposure, and one stop down, another 1 stop up. For example, if your correct exposure is at 1/30th of a second, you need to take 1 shot at 1/30th of a second, one which is underexposed at 1/60th of a second, and another which is overexposed, which is at 1/15th of a second. And finally, you can have those images blended into post-processing software and export as a final image with the correct exposure. As I promised you in the beginning, I'm going to share with you my experience as a photographer in getting the right kind of exposure for my images. So here's the trick. In order to get the correct exposure, to get the details from the shadows, I dial up the exposure enough to get the details from the shadows, and then I do just the opposite. I dial down the exposure just enough to get the details from the highlights. So that's it from this video. I hope I was able to give you some information on bracketing and hope this video will help you take more better images in future. Thank you for watching this video and giving me your continued support. I'll see you in the next one.